Hello, mathematicians. Today we're going to be learning about the greatest common factor with the distributive property. We know that the greatest common factor is the greatest factor two or more numbers have in common. So here we have an example where we have 18 and 30. We know that 1 times 18 is equal to 18. We know that 2 times 9 is equal to 18. We know that 3 times 6 is equal to 18. So we're going to take all those factors, put them in order from least to greatest, and write them down. For 30, we know that 1 times 30 is equal to 30. We know 2 times 15 is equal to 30. We know that 3 times 10 is equal to 30. And we know that 5 times 6 is equal to 30. We're going to take all those factors, put them in order from least to greatest, as we have down here, and list them out. So now that we've identified all the factors for 18 and for 30 and written them in order from least to greatest, we're going to identify which factors these two numbers have in common. So both 18 and 30 have a common factor of 1. They both have a common factor of 2. They both have a common factor of 3. And they both have a common factor of 6. So 18 and 30 have multiple common factors. However, the factor that they have in common that is the greatest is 6, because that is the biggest factor they have in common. Although 18 and 30 have multiple common factors, the GCF is 6. And again, that's because it's the factor they have in common that is the greatest. So now let's talk a little bit about the distributive property. So the distributive property is a property that tells us that when we multiply a number by its sum, it is the same as multiplying that number by each added in. The same is true for subtraction. So here we have two examples. So the parentheses means multiplication. So 4 times 2 plus 3 is the same thing as 4 times 5 because 2 plus 3 is equal to 5. And 5 times 4 minus 3 is the same thing as 5 times 1 because 4 minus 3 is equal to 1. Now that we've gone over the greatest common factor and the distributive property, we're going to use both of them to represent a product for the following expression. So here we have 12 plus 18. The first thing we need to do here is identify the greatest common factor. But before we do that, we have to list out the factors for 12 and 18. So here are all my factors of 12, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. And here are all my factors of 18, which are 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, and 18. Now that we've listed all the factors of 12 and 18, and they're in order from least to greatest, we're going to see what factors they have in common. So both 12 and 18 have a common factor of 1. They both have a common factor of 2. They both have a common factor of 3. And they both have a common factor of 6. And the greatest common factor here is 6 because it is the factor they have in common that is the greatest. So now that we've identified our greatest common factor, underneath this expression, we're going to write 6 outside on the outside of parentheses, and we have 2 spaces here because we're going to figure out 6 times what is equal to 12, and we're going to figure out 6 times what is equal to 18, so we could put those two numbers in these lines. So we know 6 times 2 is equal to 12, so on this first line, we're going to put a 2. And we know that 6 times 3 is equal to 18, so on the second line, we're going to put a 3. So 12 plus 18 should equal the same answer as 6 times 2 plus 3. But in order to make sure we have the right answer, let's check our work. So I've moved our work to that side, and we are going to check our work to see if we did it correctly. So we know that 12 plus 18 is equal to 6 times 2 plus 3, but let's make sure that's correct. So 6 times 2 is equal to 12, and so underneath that we're going to write a 12. we're going to bring down the plus sign, and then we're going to do 6 times 3, which is equal to 18, and put an 18 there. So we did end up getting the same answer. So 12 plus 18 is equal to 6 times 2 plus 3. Let's try another problem. So now we have 28 plus 20. The first thing we need to do is identify the greatest common factor. But before we do so, we need to know what the factors are for each number. Our factors of 28 are 1, 2, 4, 7, 14, and 28. Our factors of 20 are 1, 2, 4, 5, 10, and 20. Now that we have all our factors for each number, let's see what factors they have in common. So they both have a common factor of 1. They both have a common factor of 2. They both have a common factor of 4. And that's it, making 4 our greatest common factor. Now that we've identified our greatest common factor, we're going to take the 4, put it on the outside of our parentheses. So parentheses, blank plus blank, close parentheses. Now we have to figure out 4 times what is equal to 28. So we know that 4 times 7 is equal to 28. So on that first blank, we're going to put a 7. Then we know that 4 times 5 is equal to 20. So on our second blank, we're going to put a 5. So 28 plus 20 should equal the same answer as 4 times 7 plus 5. Just to make sure, let's just check our work. So 28 plus 20 should equal 4 times 7 plus 5. So we're going to multiply 4 times 7. We know that 4 times 7 is 28. So underneath that, we're going to write a 28. We're going to bring down the plus sign. And then we're going to do 4 times 5. And we know that 4 times 5 is equal to 20. So we did get the same answer, meaning 28 plus 20 is equivalent to 4 times 7 plus 5. Let's try another example. This time, let's do subtraction. So we have 32 minus 16. Before we begin, let's figure out what our factors of 32 are and what our factors of 16 are. Our factors of 32 are 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and 32. Our factors of 16 are 1, 2, 4, 8, and 16. We know that they both have a common factor of 1. We know that they both have a common factor of 2. We know that they both have a common factor of 4. We know that they both have a common factor of 8. And they both have a common factor of 16, making 16 our greatest common factor. So we're going to take the 16, put it outside the parentheses, blank minus blank. Remember that this time we're doing subtraction, so there should be a minus sign here and not a plus sign like we had before. Now we know that 16 times 2 is equal to 32. So in that first blank, we're going to put a 2. And we know that 16 times 1 is equal to 16. So in that second blank, we're going to put a 1. So let's check our work. So 32 minus 16 should equal 16 times 2 minus 1. 16 times 2 is equal to 32. This time we're going to bring down our minus sign. 16 times 1 is equal to 16. And we got our original expression, making this a true statement. So 32 minus 16 is equivalent to 16 times 2 minus 1. And let's do our final example. Here we have 75 minus 45. We know that our factors of 75 are 1, 3, 5, 15, 25, and 75. We know our factors of 45 are 1, 3, 5, 9, 15, and 45. They both have a common factor of 1. They both have a common factor of 3. They both have a common factor of 5. And they both have a common factor of 15. And that makes 15 our greatest common factor. So we're going to write out 15 with parentheses, 2 blanks, and a minus sign in between. We know that 15 times 5 is equal to 75. So in that first blank, we're going to put a 5. We also know that 15 times 3 is equal to 45. So in that second blank, we're going to put a 3. So now let's check our work. See if 75 minus 45 is equivalent to 15 times 5 minus 3. So we know that 15 times 5 is 75. So we're going to put down a 75. We're going to bring down the minus sign. And we know that 15 times 3 is equal to 45. So we're going to write a 45. So we know that 75 minus 45 is equal to 15 times 5 minus 3. And that's it for greatest common factor with the distributive property.